A millionaire took his receptionist to a gala dinner, and what she did shocked everyone. Before we start the story, comment below which city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. James Cooper, CEO of Cooper International, was about to face one of the most important nights of his career. The multinational, valued in billions, was sinking in scandals about abusive working conditions and unethical practices. Investors were fleeing, and the press wouldn't stop exposing his lack of empathy. That night's gala dinner was his only chance to save the company. He needed to convince key investors to believe in his leadership again, and for that, every detail had to be impeccable. Mr. Cooper, Greg, his assistant, interrupted his thoughts. "We have a problem. Megan canceled." James looked up from his computer. "What do you mean she canceled?" "Family emergency. She's not going to the dinner." James felt the blood rush to his head. Megan was his ideal choice. Charming, experienced, someone who conveyed the image of success he needed. "So what do you suggest, Greg?" "We don't have time to find someone else." Greg hesitated before suggesting, "Maybe someone from the team?" James scoffed. The idea seemed absurd, but with the clock ticking, he looked out the window. In the lobby, he saw Emma Taylor, the receptionist. She was talking to a delivery person, organizing packages with a firm but calm posture. Something about her caught his attention. Simplicity, discreet elegance. She could be useful. Bring her here now. A few minutes later, Emma walked into the office, trying to hide her nervousness. She had never spoken directly to the CEO before. "Mr. Cooper?" she said politely but cautiously. James observed her for a moment, as if evaluating a product. "I need you to accompany me to a gala dinner tonight. It's an important event for investors. Your only job will be to smile, be polite, and above all, not say anything unnecessary. Understood?" Emma was surprised. The proposal seemed more like an order. She wasn't paid for this, but she knew it could be an opportunity. "Yes, sir," she replied firmly, even though she didn't know what she was getting into. James nodded to Greg, ending the conversation. "Make sure she looks presentable, something sophisticated. We meet at 7 p.m., don't be late." At 7 p.m., Emma was ready. She wore an elegant dark blue dress that accentuated her confident posture, though she still felt out of place. James, waiting impatiently in the car, nodded in approval when he saw her. "You learned to follow orders quickly. Let's go." On the way, the silence was heavy. Emma tried to understand why she had been chosen, while James mentally reviewed the points he needed to present to the investors. Upon arriving at the luxurious hotel, James turned to Emma before entering. "Remember, discreet and professional, nothing more." Emma didn't respond, but inside she knew this was her chance to prove she was more than just a receptionist. As they walked through the illuminated doors, Emma felt the eyes of dozens of investors on her. She knew that night would be a turning point, for James, for Cooper International, and most importantly, for herself. The halls of the Grand Plaza Hotel were filled with luxury. Sparkling chandeliers illuminated the guests, dresses, and impeccable suits exuding power and influence. Upon entering, James Cooper projected his typical cold confidence. Beside him, Emma Taylor, though visibly nervous, held her head high with impeccable posture. As they crossed the doors, curious eyes fell on them. Who was the woman beside the powerful CEO? Many assumed she was a hired companion. Emma noticed the silent judgment but chose to ignore it. "Don't leave my side," James murmured, not even looking at her. "Of course, sir," Emma replied, keeping a professional tone, though her determination was growing. Soon, a group of influential investors approached. Led by Oliver Hayes, a magnate known for his critical stance and progressive vision. James greeted him with a firm handshake, but Oliver gave a curious look at Emma. "And who might this young lady be?" Oliver asked, smiling politely but with a tone indicating curiosity. Before James could intervene, Emma confidently replied, "Emma Taylor. I work at Cooper International." James frowned, but remained silent. "Interesting," Oliver seemed genuinely intrigued. "And what do you think of the current situation of the company?" Emma felt the weight of the question. It was the kind of question that could be a trap, but she realized it was also an opportunity. "I believe every company faces challenges," she began, choosing her words carefully. "But I see potential for real changes, especially when the focus includes human impact." The group was silent for a moment, surprised by her response. James pursed his lips, visibly uncomfortable. As the night progressed, the investors began discussing social responsibility practices. James, true to his calculated approach, spoke in terms of profits and numbers. But Oliver, clearly dissatisfied, turned to Emma again. "Miss Taylor, since you work at the company, what's your opinion on how we can regain public trust?" Emma noticed James's discomfort. She knew answering could upset him, but she also knew this was her chance. "To regain trust, it takes more than marketing strategies," Emma said, looking directly at Oliver. "It's necessary to listen to people, employees and customers, understand their stories, invest in actions that go beyond numbers. This not only improves reputation, but creates a genuine connection with the public." The silence that followed was broken by a short laugh from Oliver. Finally, someone with an interesting perspective. The other investors began murmuring among themselves, seemingly in agreement. James, now clearly irritated, tried to regain control of the conversation. "Emma isn't familiar with the challenges of large-scale leadership, of course. She's here just to observe." Oliver smiled but didn't back down. "Sometimes an outside perspective is exactly what we need, James." By the end of the dinner, Emma had captured everyone's attention. Several investors spoke with her, praising her clarity and courage. James, however, barely exchanged words with her on the way back to the car. When they finally got in the vehicle, he broke the silence. "You completely ignored my instructions." Emma turned to him, remaining calm. "I just answered questions. I didn't do anything wrong." James gripped the steering wheel, visibly frustrated. "You drew unnecessary attention. That's not acceptable." She didn't respond. Inside, she knew she had crossed lines, but she also knew she had impressed the right people. Emma looked out the window as the car crossed the lit city. Something inside her told her that night would change everything, for better or worse. The next morning, the atmosphere at Cooper International's office was more tense than ever. Emma arrived punctually, but the buzz in the corridors indicated that the conversations at the previous night's dinner had spread. Some people looked at her with curiosity, others with approving smiles, but Emma knew the only opinion that really mattered at that moment was James Cooper's. At 9 a.m., a message arrived on her computer. "Emma, in my office. Now, James." She took a deep breath before standing up and walking to the CEO's office. The door was slightly ajar, and James stood looking out the window, hands in his pockets. His tone was cold and direct as she entered. "Sit down." Emma complied, remaining calm. "You disobeyed my orders last night, Emma. I told you to be discreet. Not only did you ignore that, but you also became the center of attention." She frowned, but responded firmly. "I answered the questions I was asked. I did nothing wrong, Mr. Cooper." He turned to face her, his expression impassive. "It's not your place to decide what is or isn't wrong in this context. Your job was to accompany me, not to share your opinions." Emma felt anger bubbling up, but held it back. "If my answers helped improve the company's image with the investors, then I played a positive role." James tapped the desk lightly, signaling the end of the conversation. "You don't get it. I can't afford more distractions. You're fired." The word hit like a bomb. Even though Emma had anticipated this, hearing it still stung. But instead of protesting, she stood up, maintaining her composure. "Understood." Her voice was calm, but her eyes conveyed the strength of someone not easily defeated. Without another word, Emma left the office. That afternoon, while packing her things, Emma's phone rang. She almost ignored it, but seeing the unknown number, she answered. "Miss Taylor, this is Oliver Hayes. Could we meet for coffee? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Oliver was one of the investors she had spoken with the previous night. Intrigued, Emma agreed, and an hour later, they were seated in a nearby cafe. "I'll get straight to the point, Emma," Oliver began, crossing his arms. "Cooper International needs new leadership, especially in its European division. I was impressed with what you said last night and believe you have the right profile for a significant role there." Emma blinked in surprise. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you the position of CEO of the European division. The board will need to approve it, but I trust that will just be a formality." She hesitated for a moment. The offer was grand, almost unbelievable. But after being underestimated for so long, the chance to lead something impactful was irresistible. "I accept," she said with determination. 2 days later, James Cooper received news that infuriated him. Oliver Hayes had nominated Emma Taylor as CEO of the European division, and the board had quickly approved. This meant that, although technically subordinate to the general board, Emma now held an equal level of influence over corporate decisions. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type McDonald's in the comments. Only those who read this will understand. Now let's continue the story. When James learned he would have to attend a meeting led by Emma to align the new directives between divisions, his irritation was palpable. He knew he would have to deal with her again, but this time in a position of power equal to his. The meeting was set at Cooper International's headquarters. Emma arrived with renewed confidence. She was dressed elegantly and carried organized documents for the presentation. Upon entering the conference room, she found James already seated, surrounded by other executives. "Miss Taylor," he said with a forced smile. "Or should I say, CEO Taylor?" "Just Emma is fine, Mr. Cooper," she replied calmly before starting her presentation. During the meeting, Emma demonstrated clarity and leadership, outlining plans to implement more ethical and transparent practices. Some executives supported her ideas, while others, aligned with James, showed resistance. At the end of the meeting, James approached her privately. "Impressive presentation," he said, his tone dripping with irony. "But I hope you realize it won't be easy to implement these ideas in practice." Emma didn't back down. "I never expected it to be easy, but I know how to deal with obstacles, Mr. Cooper." The two stared at each other for a moment, the air charged with tension. It was clear that neither was willing to yield, but both felt a strange mix of respect and provocation. As Emma left the room, James realized that dealing with her would be much more complicated than he had anticipated. But at the same time, he couldn't shake the determination in her eyes from his mind. Emma Taylor knew that taking on the role of CEO of Cooper International's European division was just the beginning of a bigger challenge. She was aware that James Cooper wouldn't make her journey easy, and that internal resistance would be constant. But her determination to bring about change and prove her worth was stronger than any obstacle. On the other hand, James closely watched Emma's moves. He couldn't decide if he admired her courage or saw her as a direct threat to his authority. A confrontation between the two seemed inevitable. A week after the introductory meeting, Emma called for a new video conference with the division executives, including James. The goal was to discuss the plan to align all units with a new corporate conduct code focused on social responsibility and transparency. True to his style, James joined the meeting late, adjusting his tie as if the delay were intentional. As he sat down, Emma began her presentation, explaining how the new code would be implemented. "This will require significant changes in the division's culture, but I believe it's essential to regain public trust and increase our talent retention," Emma said calmly. James crossed his arms, waiting for his turn to speak. When Emma opened the floor for questions, he was the first to speak up. "This sounds very idealistic, Emma," he began, his tone heavy with sarcasm. "But have you considered how this will affect operational costs? The last thing we need right now is to compromise our budget with initiatives that, frankly, might not bring returns." Emma kept her composure, but there was a defiant gleam in her eyes. "I believe numbers are just part of the problem, Mr. Cooper. Our biggest cost right now is the negative impact on the company's reputation. Every cent invested in transparency will be recouped by market trust and the retention of qualified talent." Other executives murmured in approval, and James realized he was losing ground. When Emma detailed the practical steps of the new code, including audits in all divisions, James interrupted again. "Internal audits? It sounds like we're preparing to dig more holes than we can fill." "We've been digging these holes for years, Mr. Cooper," Emma replied firmly. "Pretending they don't exist won't make them disappear." The tension in the room was palpable. Other executives looked between the two, clearly divided. At the end of the meeting, Emma concluded, "I understand that changes are uncomfortable, but if we want to survive in the current market, we need to go beyond immediate profit. This is a long-term decision." James remained silent, but his expression made it clear that the battle was far from over. After the meeting, James waited for Emma in the hallway. When she exited the room, he intercepted her. "Do you really think you can give me orders?" he said, crossing his arms. Emma stopped, evaluating him for a moment before responding. I'm not giving orders, Mr. Cooper. I'm proposing changes that benefit the company as a whole. If that seems like a threat to your authority, maybe the problem isn't with what I'm proposing. James stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Careful, Emma. You're treading on dangerous ground. She held her ground, refusing to back down. Don't underestimate me, James. I've been fired before for speaking my mind, but that didn't stop me from getting to where I am now. If you think you can intimidate me, you're underestimating the wrong person. For a moment, silence hung between them as they locked eyes. There was more than just professional tension in the air. James felt a mix of frustration and admiration for her courage, while Emma sensed that behind James's arrogance was someone afraid of losing control. In the days that followed, the tension between Emma and James was palpable to everyone around them. While Emma focused on implementing changes in the European branch, James used his influence to slow down some of the processes. Despite the challenges, Emma began gaining the support of other executives. Her straightforward approach and ability to listen to suggestions made her an approachable leader, in stark contrast to James's authoritarian style. By the end of the week, Emma received a notification that James had called a board meeting without informing her. She knew he was plotting something, but she also knew she was ready to face him again. While reviewing her documents for the upcoming meeting, one thought crossed her mind. If James thinks he can take me down, he's about to learn a lesson. The news of James Cooper's unscheduled meeting reached Emma while she was at her desk, fine-tuning the timeline for implementing the new code of conduct. She understood that James wouldn't act openly against her without a clear motive, but she suspected he was planning something to weaken her position. The next day, Emma arrived early to the conference room, determined to counter any attack. As the board members began filing in, she maintained a steady demeanor, even when James entered with a self-satisfied smile. "Good morning, everyone," James began once the room had settled. "I've called this meeting to address some concerns about the financial impact of the new policies we're implementing." Emma took a deep breath. She recognized this as an attempt to discredit her. James presented graphs and charts highlighting potential costs associated with the audits and changes Emma had proposed. He used words like impractical and risky, painting a picture of looming chaos. When he finished, all eyes turned to Emma. She calmly stood, picked up a marker, and walked to the whiteboard. "Let's talk about real costs," she began, drawing a line on the board. "On the left, we have the financial losses from lawsuits, reputational damage, and employee turnover over the past 3 years. On the right, the estimated costs to implement the changes we're proposing." She turned to face the executives, holding the marker firmly. "Now let's be honest. Which of these costs seems more sustainable in the long run?" A hush fell over the room, interrupted only by murmurs of approval. Emma seized the moment. "Ignoring these issues is not a viable strategy. We need to address them now or risk further damage to our credibility and opportunities." As Emma spoke, several executives began to agree with her, including Robert McCain, one of the board's senior members. Speaking for the first time in months, he said, "Emma's right. We've ignored these problems for too long. We need a more responsible approach." James attempted to intervene, but Robert's influence was significant, and others started siding with Emma. By the meeting's end, it was evident that James had lost most of the support. However, he showed no sign of frustration, instead giving Emma a calculated look before leaving the room, as though already planning his next move. In the weeks that followed, James began working behind the scenes. He rallied allies within the company and delayed budget approvals for projects under Emma's leadership. He justified his actions as financial precautions, but Emma knew it was an attempt to sabotage her efforts. Emma, however, refused to back down. She found ways to circumvent the delays, seeking direct board support and exploring creative alternatives to keep her projects moving. Each obstacle James threw at her only seemed to strengthen her resolve. During a weekly meeting, the tension between them reached a peak. Emma was presenting early results from a pilot audit at one of the European branches, showing a significant increase in employee satisfaction. James interrupted. "What about the impact on profits?" Are you intentionally leaving that out? Emma met his gaze, keeping her voice steady. I'm presenting measurable human impact. Financial numbers will be in the quarterly report, as they always are. How convenient, James replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Emma took a deep breath. What's convenient, Mr. Cooper, is using financial objections as an excuse to avoid necessary changes. The room went silent. Once again, Emma's strength left an impression on those present, but the rift between her and James grew deeper. Their rivalry extended beyond the workplace. During a corporate event, they were both invited to speak on the same leadership panel. James seized the opportunity to make a veiled critique of Emma's leadership style. Leadership is about firmness and clarity, he said. You can't always please everyone, and tough decisions often need to be made. When it was Emma's turn, she spoke with a calm but purposeful tone. Leadership is also about adaptability and empathy. The greatest leaders don't ignore the changes around them. They embrace them and make them their strength. The audience noticed the tension between them and was captivated by their dynamic. Despite their constant clashes, something unexpected began to emerge. Beneath the provocations and confrontations, there was a growing respect. Emma acknowledged James's strategic mind, while he started to admire her determination and vision. In quieter moments, their exchanged glances hinted at something deeper. But neither was ready to admit it, not yet. One evening, while reviewing reports in his office, James found himself thinking about Emma in a way that unsettled him. At the same time, in her own office, Emma realized that despite the friction, her view of James was beginning to shift. The weeks ahead were marked by a series of tense encounters and meaningful moments between them. Though the conflicts remained intense, both began to sense a connection they couldn't ignore. Everything changed when an urgent business trip arose to address strategic issues at a European branch. As the primary stakeholders, Emma and James were assigned to travel together. The long flight began in silence. Emma reviewed documents while James, seated beside her, gazed out the window, lost in thought. Ready to face the tough questions? James finally broke the silence, his tone laced with provocation. I'm always ready, Emma replied without looking up from her papers. He gave a slight smile, intrigued by her quick response. But throughout the trip, despite the exchanged glances and brief comments, the tension between them seemed different. There was less hostility and more curiosity. When they arrived at the branch, an important meeting with local leaders revealed an unexpected problem. Productivity numbers were below expectations, and the managers claimed that Emma's proposed changes had generated resistance among the employees. James, true to his direct style, wasted no time pointing this out. I warned you that drastic changes could cause resistance, Emma. Now we are dealing with the consequences. She didn't back down. It's not the change that's causing this, James. It's the lack of communication. We need to listen to what the employees are saying. Determined to find a solution, Emma organized a feedback session with the branch workers. James reluctantly decided to accompany her. At first, the meeting was tense, but as the employees started to speak, it became clear that many felt disconnected from the leadership and feared the new policies. Emma took the lead, listening carefully and suggesting adjustments that balanced the workers' needs with the company's goals. James was impressed by her ability to mediate the conflict and create a collaborative environment. After the meeting, Emma and James went to dinner at a local restaurant. The atmosphere was cozy, with soft lighting and quiet music. For the first time, their conversation flowed without sarcasm or provocations. You were impressive today, James admitted after a few minutes of silence. Emma looked at him, surprised by his sincerity. I didn't know you were capable of complimenting someone. He smiled, a little embarrassed. Neither did I, but I need to admit it when I see something exceptional. Emma relaxed a bit, feeling more at ease. You know, James, sometimes you surprise me. When you're not trying to challenge me, you seem almost human. They both laughed, and the tension between them gave way to something lighter. However, they both knew that this moment had a greater significance than they were willing to admit. The next day, a technical problem at the branch forced Emma and James to work late. When they finally finished, a storm left them stranded in the building, with no available transportation. While waiting for the rain to let up, they sat in the branch's small lounge, drinking coffee and talking. For the first time, Emma saw a more vulnerable side of James, who talked about the pressures he faced as CEO and the sacrifices he had made to get where he was. "Sometimes I feel like everything I've built is meaningless," he confessed, looking at the cup in his hands. "Maybe the problem is what you chose to value." Emma replied gently. He looked at her, surprised by the depth of her words. "And you, Emma? Why are you still here facing all this?" She smiled thoughtfully. "Because I believe I can make a difference. And despite everything, I believe you can too." As the rain continued, they sat in silence, but the closeness between them felt more intense. When their eyes met, for a moment, time seemed to stand still. James was the first to look away, but the impact of that moment stayed with him for the rest of the night. Something inside him had changed, and he knew it wouldn't be easy to ignore. In the following days, James and Emma worked together to solve the branch's problems, and their partnership began to flow surprisingly efficiently. Although they still exchanged occasional provocations, there was a growing complicity. One evening, after another successful meeting, James walked her to the hotel. When they stopped at the door, he hesitated before saying, "Emma, I need to admit something." She looked at him, intrigued. "What is it?" "You make me question a lot of things. About myself, about how I've been running my life." Emma was silent, but her gaze said more than any words. "Maybe that's not a bad thing, James." As Emma entered the hotel, James stood at the door, watching her disappear down the hall. He knew he was falling in love, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to admit it, to her or to himself. Back at Cooper International's headquarters, James Cooper was more restless than ever. Since the trip to the European branch, his relationship with Emma Taylor had undeniably changed. The constant provocations and rivalries had given way to moments of mutual admiration, and James could no longer ignore what he felt for her. The problem was that admitting these feelings meant giving up the control he valued so much. Emma, on the other hand, also felt that something was different. Although she tried to keep their interactions strictly professional, the moments they had shared on the trip were always present in her mind. She knew she was beginning to see James beyond the arrogant boss he used to be. At the first meeting after their return, the tension between them reached a peak. Emma presented a new project focused on strengthening transparency with employees, which involved a significant investment in training programs and benefits. James, sitting at the other end of the table, waited patiently until she finished before raising his objection. "Emma, this is ambitious, but you're ignoring the financial impact. We're dealing with a slow recovery, and adding more costs now isn't feasible." Emma remained calm. "James, we've already proven that investing in employees increases productivity and reduces turnover. It's not a cost, it's a strategic investment." "Strategic?" James retorted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "It seems more like a risky bet that could push us further into the red." Emma felt the heat rising but responded firmly. "So what do you suggest then? Continuing on the same path that got us into this situation in the first place?" Silence filled the room as the other executives watched the intense exchange. James finally sighed and shook his head. "Do as you wish, but don't say I didn't warn you." After the meeting, Emma decided to confront him directly in his office. Entering without knocking, she found James sitting at his desk, staring at a report he clearly wasn't reading. "Can we talk?" she asked, crossing her arms. He looked up, surprised, but gestured for her to come in. "What is it now?" Emma took a deep breath before responding. "Why are you making things so difficult? You know what I'm proposing is best for the company." James set the report aside and stared at her. "Maybe because you make me feel like I'm losing control." The words came out before he could stop them, and the shock on Emma's face was evident. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, hesitantly. James stood up, walking to the window as he tried to find the right words. "Since you took this position, you've challenged everything I believed about leadership, about how things should be done. And, worse yet, you've made me question things I never wanted to think about." Emma felt her heart race but kept her composure. "Maybe that's a good thing, James," he chuckled softly, without humor. "Good? It drives me crazy." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Emma finally broke the moment, stepping forward. "Maybe it's time you stop fighting it and start understanding what's really happening here." James turned to her, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made the air feel thicker. "And what exactly is happening, Emma?" She didn't answer, but the look they shared said more than words. That night, Emma was the last one to leave the office. As she walked down the empty hallway, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she found James standing there, looking both confused and determined. "Emma, I can't keep pretending this isn't happening," he started, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. She stayed silent, waiting for him to continue. "You've changed everything. I don't know if I'm ready for it, but I know I don't want to fight it anymore either." Emma's heart raced, but she kept her gaze steady. "So, what do you want to do, James?" He took a step closer, narrowing the space between them. "I want to stop pretending I don't care. I want to be honest about how I feel." Before Emma could respond, James surprised her with a bold gesture. He gently took her hand as if asking for permission to move forward. When she didn't pull away, he leaned in slowly until their lips met. The kiss was tender but filled with unspoken emotions. It was as if all the tension between them had found release, transforming into something deeper and more genuine. When the kiss ended, Emma pulled back slightly, still holding his hand. "This changes everything, James." He nodded, his expression serious. "I know, but I think we're ready for this change." Emma wasn't sure if he was right, but something inside her told her it was worth the risk. As Emma headed home that night, she couldn't shake the image of James's gaze from her mind. Something had shifted between them, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same. Their relationship now stood on uncertain ground. The kiss had broken the barrier between them, but hadn't resolved the underlying tensions. The next day, Emma tried to focus on her responsibilities, and James did the same. Both were determined not to let their feelings interfere with the company, but fate seemed to have other plans. A week after the kiss, Emma received an anonymous email with a confidential attachment. The attachment contained old documents revealing unethical practices carried out under James's direct supervision years ago. Though the actions were from the past, the fallout from a public disclosure could be devastating for him and the company. Emma felt a knot in her stomach. Confronting James meant risking the trust they were building. Ignoring the documents, however, went against everything she believed in. She decided to wait for the right moment to address the issue. Meanwhile, James noticed Emma's distance. In meetings, she remained professional, but something in her demeanor hinted at inner turmoil. "Emma, are you okay?" he asked when they were alone in the hallway. "I'm fine, just focused on work," she replied, avoiding direct eye contact. He narrowed his eyes, suspicious, but didn't press further. Days later, during a board meeting, shocking news broke. The documents Emma had received had been leaked to the press. Headlines began to circulate, accusing James of past unethical practices. The room descended into chaos, with board members demanding immediate explanations. Let's play a little joke for those who only read the comments. Type coffee in the comments. Only those who got this far will understand. Now, let's continue with the story. James, stunned, scanned the room. His mind raced to figure out how the confidential information had been leaked. When his eyes met Emma's, realization dawned. "Was it you?" he asked in a low but accusing tone. Emma, shocked by the accusation, responded immediately. "Of course not. Do you really think I would risk everything like this?" "You knew about these documents, didn't you?" he pressed, ignoring the others in the room. Emma hesitated. "Yes, I knew. But I didn't leak them." James shook his head, disbelief written all over his face. "You should have come to me. You let this happen, and now you want me to believe you had nothing to do with it?" Before Emma could respond, a board member interrupted. "We need solutions, not arguments, Cooper. This could ruin your reputation and the company." The meeting ended abruptly, but the tension between Emma and James was far from resolved. Later, James stormed into Emma's office. He slammed the door shut, his face red with frustration. "You should have trusted me," he snapped. "Instead, you kept this hidden like a weapon." Emma stood from her chair, equally furious. "Do you really think I'd do anything to harm the company? I received the documents anonymously and was trying to figure out how to handle it without causing a disaster." "And you caused exactly what you were trying to avoid," he shot back, crossing his arms. Emma took a deep breath, trying to contain her anger. You know what your problem is, James? You don't trust anyone but yourself. You can't see that people around you might actually be here to help, not just threaten your precious control. James stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. And you don't understand what it's like to carry the weight of all this. It's not just the company, Emma. It's my life. Emma didn't back down. Maybe it's time you stopped acting like it's all about you. The silence that followed was heavy. James finally stepped back, shaking his head. I think I made a mistake. I shouldn't have mixed personal with professional. Those words cut Emma deeply. She crossed her arms, her chest tightening. Maybe you're right. James left her office without looking back. In the days that followed, Emma and James barely spoke. The company was in crisis, and both focused on addressing the fallout. Yet the silence between them was unbearable. Despite her anger, Emma couldn't ignore her feelings. Even after their confrontation, she knew there was something real between them. James, for his part, was torn. He didn't want to admit it, but he missed Emma's presence, even amid the chaos. As the investigation into the leak continued, they discovered that a longtime executive and close ally of James had been responsible for sending the documents to the press. He had done it to weaken James and take over as CEO. When the truth came out, James felt a mix of relief and guilt. He knew he owed Emma an apology, but wasn't sure how to approach her. One evening, James appeared at Emma's office, looking visibly uncomfortable. I found out who leaked the documents, he began. Emma looked at him, surprised. And it wasn't you, he added, his voice tinged with regret. She didn't respond, waiting for him to continue. I was wrong to doubt your loyalty. Emma remained composed. You doubted me because you've never seen me as an equal. You've always thought you were above me, James, and that's what needs to change. He nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. You're right, and I want to change that, if you'll give me the chance. Emma studied him for a long moment before replying. I'll think about it. Though the wounds were still fresh, both knew that conversation was an important step toward rebuilding what had been broken. As Emma watched him leave, she realized that for the first time, James seemed genuinely willing to change. A week after the confrontation, Emma and James barely exchanged words. Immersed in their responsibilities, the weight of what had happened lingered between them. However, an unexpected opportunity for reconciliation arose when a gala event was planned for the top partners and investors of Cooper International. It was a luxurious evening, held in an impeccably decorated garden, with soft lights hanging from the trees and classical music in the background. Emma arrived alone, wearing a long black dress that highlighted her elegance and a confidence that seemed almost palpable. Her hair was pulled back into an elegant bun, and the slight smile on her lips made everyone look at her as soon as she entered. James, who was already at the event greeting guests, turned when he heard the murmurs of admiration from the entrance. When he saw Emma, his breath caught for a moment. She looked different that night, almost unreal. It wasn't just her beauty that captivated him, but also the strength and determination that seemed to radiate from her presence. He watched her interact with the guests, laughing and speaking naturally. Her magnetism was impossible to ignore. For the first time, James felt vulnerable in front of someone, but at the same time, he knew he needed to talk to her. After a few hours of watching Emma from a distance, James decided to approach her. He found her by a table, talking to a group of investors. As he arrived, the group politely dispersed, making way for the CEO. "Emma, can we talk?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Emma hesitated, but something in her eyes said she knew this moment was inevitable. "Sure." James led her outside the hall to a small garden lit by fairy lights and candles. The trees swayed gently in the wind, and the distant sound of music created an almost magical atmosphere. When they stopped under an arch decorated with flowers, James turned to her, clearly nervous. "You look beautiful tonight, Emma." The words came out before he could think. Emma smiled slightly but kept her composure. "Thank you, James, but I'm sure you didn't bring me here just to compliment me." He laughed, shaking his head. "No, it wasn't just that. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened between us, about how things got out of control." Emma crossed her arms, waiting for him to continue. "I was an idiot, Emma. Doubting you was my biggest mistake. But what bothers me most isn't just that, he said, stepping closer. It's the fact that, since the moment I met you, you've been changing the way I see the world, and honestly, that scares me. Emma blinked, surprised by his honesty. For a moment, she was speechless. James, she began, but he interrupted. No, let me finish. You make me want to be a better person, Emma. And I don't know what to do with that except to say that He hesitated, his eyes locked on hers. That I need you, in every way. Before Emma could respond, James leaned in and kissed her again. This time the kiss was deeper, more sincere. He held her face gently, as if afraid to break the moment. Emma kissed him back, feeling a mix of emotions she couldn't describe. When the kiss ended, they stood in silence, breathing slowly as the stars shone above them. Before they could say anything, an assistant hurriedly approached. Mr. Cooper, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something urgent that needs your attention. James sighed, reluctant but knowing he had to handle the situation. He looked at Emma, his eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't hide. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back as soon as I can. Emma nodded, watching as he walked away. She stayed in the garden, trying to process everything that had happened. 10 minutes later, James returned, but something in his expression had changed. He looked worried, almost tense. What happened? Emma asked, immediately alert. I just got some information, he said, his voice lower. One of the investors is trying to take advantage of the recent crisis. He plans to acquire a significant portion of the company's shares to influence the board against me. Emma frowned. Ho. James hesitated before answering. Oliver Hayes. Emma was shocked. Oliver had always shown support for her and the changes she proposed. Knowing he was acting behind the scenes felt like a blow. That makes sense, she finally said. He's always been strategic, but I never imagined he'd act against you like this. James ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. I don't know how to deal with this without creating more chaos. Emma lightly touched his arm, drawing his gaze. We'll deal with this together, James. In the days that followed, Emma and James worked side by side to neutralize Oliver's actions. They gathered allies on the board and presented a strategy that not only saved James's position, but also strengthened the company amidst the crisis. During this time, their relationship became more solid. Although there were still challenges, both knew they were stronger together than apart. That night, after another successful meeting with the board, James walked Emma to her office door. Before letting her go in, he held her hand and said, Whatever happens, I don't want to lose what we have. Emma smiled, feeling that, for the first time, James was being completely honest. One morning, while Emma was reviewing reports in her office, she received a message from James. I need you with me tonight. Prepare for something special, James. She was intrigued. James rarely made invitations without explaining exactly what he expected. When she arrived at the indicated location, a luxurious restaurant in the city center, she found James waiting for her at a reserved table. He was impeccably dressed and the setting was intimate, lit by candles. What's all this, James? Emma asked as she sat down. I thought we deserved a break for something that doesn't involve charts, reports, or crises, he replied, smiling. Emma relaxed a bit, though she was still curious. The evening went on pleasantly, with them sharing memories and even laughing about the tensions they had faced together. But as dinner was nearing its end, James grew serious. Emma, there's something I need to tell you, he began, his tone indicating that the moment was important. She leaned in slightly, waiting for what was to come. James took a deep breath before continuing. I've been invited to participate in a merger with an international company. It's a huge opportunity, but it comes at a cost. It means stepping away from Cooper International for at least a year to lead the negotiations and integration. Emma felt her heart tighten. And you want to accept? It's not a matter of wanting. It's something that could save the company and ensure its stability in the future. Emma knew James was right, but the idea of him stepping away was painful. Despite all the difficulties, they had built something together, and the thought of moving forward without him was daunting. Does this mean we won't have this? She asked, hesitant. James reached out, holding her hand. I don't know what it will look like, but I want you to know this doesn't change what I feel for you. The next morning, as Emma processed what had happened, she received another surprise. Oliver Hayes had called for an emergency board meeting. He was presenting a proposal to take over James's position during his absence, a clear strategic move to consolidate his power. Emma arrived at the meeting room determined to protect the legacy she had built alongside James. During the meeting, Oliver made veiled criticisms of the current leadership, suggesting it was time for a more modern and bold vision. "With all due respect, Mr. Hayes," Emma said, interrupting, "your bold vision seems to ignore the values we're trying to rebuild. This company needs consistency and integrity, not power games." Oliver smiled, but irritation flickered in his eyes. "And who do you suggest should take that position in James' absence? Yourself?" The room fell silent. Emma knew she had a choice to make in that moment. She stood, keeping her gaze fixed on Oliver. "If necessary, yes, I'll step up." After the meeting, Emma met with James in his office. He had already heard about the board discussion. "Did you really say you'd take over the company?" he asked, his tone a mix of surprise and admiration. "I won't let Oliver turn this place into chaos. We've worked too hard to build something solid, and I won't let him tear it down," Emma replied, determined. James stepped closer, taking her hands. "You know this means more pressure, more challenges." "I know, but I also know it's worth it." He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You're incredible. You know that?" Emma smiled. "I'm just trying to do the right thing." The night before the board's final decision, James invited Emma to meet him again. This time, he took her to a secluded pier where a yacht awaited them. "I thought we could use some fresh air before making big decisions," he said as the boat gently glided across the water. Under the starry sky, as they talked, James suddenly stopped and turned to her. "Emma, there's something I want to ask you before I leave." She waited, puzzled, as he pulled a small object from his pocket. "I know things between us started complicated, but you've made me see the world differently, and I don't want to lose that. I want you by my side, no matter where I am." Emma looked at the ring in his hand, her heart pounding. "Are you proposing?" "Yes." "Emma, will you stay with me? Not just at the company, but in life?" Emma was speechless, but the smile on her face gave her answer. "Yes, James." As the waves gently lapped against the boat, they knew they could face anything together. After James' unexpected proposal, Emma felt as though her life was spinning. Her spontaneous yes had come from genuine emotion, but reality quickly set in. With James preparing to leave the company for a year and Emma under mounting pressure from the board, their promise to stay together felt more fragile than ever. The next day, Emma returned to the office to tackle a new wave of challenges. Leaks continued to fuel media rumors, and Oliver Hayes was relentless in undermining her. Despite this, she was determined to prove she was capable of leading Cooper International in James's absence. The first meeting of the day was called by Oliver, who wasted no time questioning Emma's strategic plan. Sitting at the center of the room, he began with his usual air of superiority. "With all due respect, Miss Taylor, I think your approach is overly optimistic given the critical moment we're facing. Perhaps we need more experienced leadership to handle the investors." Emma, prepared for the attack, replied calmly, "Optimism isn't the issue, Mr. Hayes. The issue is the lack of commitment to a long-term vision. Investors need consistent results, and that's what I'm offering." But Oliver had an ace up his sleeve. He slid a folder across the table to Emma. "Then perhaps you can explain why some of your recent projects are over budget. That doesn't exactly inspire confidence." Emma opened the folder, finding altered figures that didn't match the actual reports. It was a calculated, dirty move. "These numbers are inaccurate," she said, looking directly at Oliver. "If someone is trying to manipulate the data, they'd better reconsider before this goes public." The tension in the room was palpable. Oliver didn't respond, but the look on his face made it clear he wasn't backing down. As Emma battled the board, James faced his own decisions. He was tied up in endless meetings with the merger team, but his thoughts often drifted to Emma. He knew she was under immense pressure, and that leaving the company now could be a mistake. Determined to support her, James unexpectedly returned to the office at the end of the day. When he entered Emma's office, he found her buried under piles of papers, clearly exhausted. "I thought you'd take some time off today," he said, crossing his arms. Emma looked up, surprised but relieved to see him. I can't rest while Oliver keeps trying to destabilize me. He's playing dirty, James. James stepped closer, taking her hand. You're not in this alone, Emma. I'm here to make sure he doesn't cross the line. She sighed, feeling some of the weight lift. Thank you. But I can't rely on you for everything. If I want to lead, I need to face this on my own. James smiled slightly, admiring her strength. You already are, and you're doing it better than anyone could have imagined. That evening, James invited Emma to dinner, hoping to distract her from work tensions. He chose a quiet restaurant where they could talk without interruption. Their conversation soon turned personal. Have you ever thought about where we'd be now if that night at the gala hadn't happened? He asked playfully. Emma laughed, shaking her head. We'd probably still hate each other, or pretending to hate each other. James corrected with a teasing smile. Their light-hearted moment was interrupted when Emma's phone rang. She hesitated, but seeing it was a trusted executive, decided to answer. Emma, you need to get back to the office. Something urgent has come up. She looked at James, concerned. Looks like our break is over. When they arrived at the office, Emma discovered more documents had been leaked, this time outlining internal plans for the company's future. The media had already picked up the story, and investors were demanding answers. Reviewing the documents, Emma realized the leaks were designed to undermine confidence in her leadership. James, seeing the papers, immediately suspected Oliver. This is his doing, James said firmly. He's trying to destroy you and consolidate control on the board. Emma took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. Then we need to act before he succeeds. Emma and James spent the night analyzing the data and strategizing how to expose Oliver. They decided to gather evidence directly linking the leaks to him, knowing it would take time and patience. As they worked side by side, their connection deepened. Despite the chaos, they found solace in each other. Emma, do you realize you're handling this better than I ever could? James said, pausing to look at her. She glanced at him, surprised. I never thought I'd hear that from you. He smiled. You amaze me every day. By dawn, Emma finally found the proof she needed, a series of emails from Oliver to a journalist detailing the leaked documents and outlining his next moves. She turned to James, holding the papers. We've got him, James smiled, pride and admiration in his eyes. I knew you would. Emma knew the battle was far from over, but for the first time, she felt they had a real advantage. Now, it was only a matter of time before Oliver was exposed. The office was silent as Emma and James reviewed the incriminating emails that linked Oliver directly to the leaks. Each line reinforced the suspicion that he had manipulated data and information to discredit them. The feeling of relief was brief, as they both knew revealing this would be a dangerous game. Oliver was an influential man, and any misstep could backfire. James crossed his arms and looked at Emma, who was scrutinizing every detail with intense focus. He knew she was bearing a huge burden, but he also saw that her determination was unwavering. This made him admire her even more. Still, there was a shadow of concern in his eyes. If we expose this the wrong way, he'll retaliate, James said, breaking the silence. We need something more solid, something that will prevent him from defending himself. Emma looked up from the computer, her fingers still hovering over the keyboard. There was a glint of resolution in her eyes. Then we need allies. We can't face Oliver alone. We need to gather the people who know what he's capable of and show them the impact of his actions on the company. James nodded, impressed by her clarity. The plan made sense, but he knew this would put them both in a vulnerable position. Trust in the board was already shaken, and bringing in allies meant relying on people who had remained neutral until now. They spent the next few hours organizing the emails and creating a detailed dossier to present to the board. The clock was nearing midnight when Emma finally closed the last document. James watched her from across the room, silent, as if weighing the burden she was carrying. You should rest, he said, approaching her. Emma smiled, tired but determined. I can't rest while he's still out there. James gently held her face, forcing her to look directly at him. You don't have to carry this alone, Emma. We're in this together, remember? She felt the sincerity in his words and nodded slightly. It was strange for her to accept help, but something about James made her feel safe. even in the midst of chaos. The next morning, Emma and James arrived at the office before any other executive. They called an emergency meeting with the board members who were still undecided about the leadership. When the group finally gathered, Emma took the lead, holding the dossier firmly. "Thank you for coming so early. What I have to say isn't easy, but it's necessary," she began, her voice steady. She presented the evidence directly, showing how Oliver had used internal information to manipulate decisions and undermine confidence in James's leadership. The board was silent, absorbing every detail. It was clear that Oliver's actions not only compromised the company, but also endangered the future of everyone working there. When Emma finished, one of the senior board members, Robert McCain, cleared his throat. "This is very serious, but we need to confirm that this evidence is authentic before taking any action." James intervened, his voice authoritative. "I've personally verified all the information. If there are doubts, we can bring in external experts, but it doesn't change the fact that Oliver acted against the company and all of us." The reaction was mixed. Some members agreed immediately, while others hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of confronting Oliver directly. It was then that Emma decided to play her last card. "I know this may be hard to accept, but turning a blind eye to these actions makes us complicit. If we want to lead with integrity, we need to act now." The impact of Emma's words was palpable. One by one, the board members began to express support for the plan to expose Oliver. Only one or two still seemed hesitant, but the majority were on Emma and James's side. As the meeting concluded, Emma felt a mix of relief and tension. She knew they had taken an important step, but the battle was far from won. James stayed by her side as the board members left, and when the room was empty, he finally spoke. "You were brilliant." Emma sighed. "I hope it's enough." James moved closer, holding her hands. "It was more than enough. You're leading this in a way few could." She looked into his eyes, seeing the genuine pride in his expression. For a moment, she forgot the tension, feeling grateful to have him by her side. That night, while Emma reviewed the next steps at home, she received a text from James. "Whatever happens, you've proven you're more than capable. Never doubt that, James." Emma smiled at the phone, feeling more confident than ever. But she knew the final confrontation with Oliver was still to come, and he wouldn't be an easy opponent. The Cooper International boardroom was packed, but the silence was deafening. Emma Taylor stood in the center, holding the dossier containing the evidence against Oliver Hayes. James was beside her, his eyes fixed on Oliver, who seemed relaxed in his leather chair, as if certain that what was coming wouldn't touch him. Emma took a deep breath before starting. Her voice, though calm, carried an authority that made everyone lean in slightly to hear her. In the past few weeks, Cooper International has faced internal challenges that threatened its integrity and leadership. Today, I present evidence that these threats didn't come from outside, but from someone inside this room. She opened the dossier and began projecting the documents on the screen. The emails, the changes in financial reports, the leaks of confidential information, everything was there, directly connected to Oliver Hayes. The tension in the room grew with each new piece of evidence presented. Oliver, for the first time, lost his confident smile. He tried to maintain his composure, but his expression revealed growing discomfort. When Emma finished, a heavy silence hung in the air. "This is absurd," Oliver said, standing up. "These documents were clearly manipulated. There's no concrete proof that I did anything wrong." James leaned on the table, his eyes locked on Oliver. "Manipulated? We have digital records confirming the authenticity of these documents. This isn't just a matter of opinion, Oliver, it's a fact." Oliver laughed, but his voice wavered slightly. "And what are you going to do? Kick me out without a proper investigation? You need me to stabilize this company." Emma stood up, facing Oliver directly. "We don't need someone who puts their own interests above the company, and we don't need you to stabilize anything. We've already done that without you." The board members began murmuring among themselves. The balance was clearly tipping against Oliver. He looked around, seeking support, but no one seemed willing to defend him. Finally, the senior board member, Robert McCain, stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe the evidence speaks for itself. We should vote for the immediate removal of Oliver Hayes and forward this information to the proper authorities." The vote was unanimous. Oliver was officially removed from Cooper International, and the atmosphere in the room instantly lightened, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. He left without saying a word, but gave Emma one last look filled with resentment. Once the room emptied, Emma felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. James approached her, holding her hands firmly. "You did it. You saved the company." She smiled, though her eyes showed how tired she was. "I didn't do it alone. I couldn't have done it without you." James smiled, leaning slightly toward her. "I think we make a great team." That evening, James took Emma out for a special dinner to celebrate. He chose a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city, softly lit and surrounded by a cool breeze. It was a peaceful moment after weeks of tension, and both felt the importance of not only celebrating the victory, but also the partnership they had built. As they toasted, James held Emma's hand across the table. "You know, after all this, I'm not going anywhere, right?" Emma laughed, shaking her head. "I thought you were set on pursuing the international merger." James sighed. "The merger can wait. What we have here is more important." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She knew how rarely James put anything above work. Hearing that from him felt like a milestone in their relationship. Before she could respond, James leaned in and kissed her, softly but with enough intensity to convey his feelings. For the first time, they both felt like the future was finally in their hands. Months later, Cooper International was thriving under Emma and James's leadership. The changes they implemented brought not only financial success, but also a renewed culture of integrity and collaboration. Emma continued to lead with strength, tempered by the empathy that endeared her to everyone around her. James, by her side, played a more supportive role than ever. He had learned that leadership wasn't just about control, it was about trust and inspiration. One evening, as they worked late at the office, Emma looked at James and asked, "Do you regret staying?" James smiled, stepping closer to her. "Never. Staying was the best decision I've ever made." They stood in silence for a moment, simply enjoying each other's company. The months that followed were transformative for both Emma and James. Cooper International was stronger than ever, guided by James's strategic leadership and Emma's innovative, human-focused vision. The struggles of the past seemed like a distant memory, replaced by a love that grew deeper every day. James knew his life had changed forever when Emma entered it. She not only reshaped his views on leadership, but also showed him what it meant to open up to love. One quiet evening on the terrace of their apartment, James made a decision. "Emma," he began, holding her hand gently, "from the moment I met you, you challenged everything I believed in, and it was the best thing that could have happened to me." Emma smiled, surprised by the tenderness in his tone. She had expected something casual, but the look in his eyes told her this was important. "I can't imagine my life without you anymore. You're my partner in everything, work, life, and whatever's ahead. So I want to ask you." He paused, pulling a small ring from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" Emma covered her mouth, completely surprised. Though she knew they loved each other, she hadn't expected James to propose so spontaneously. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, James, I will." He slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her as the city lights sparkled in the background, witnessing the most special moment of their lives. The wedding was planned for a few months later, a simple yet elegant ceremony that reflected their essence as a couple. Held in a garden filled with white flowers under a bright blue sky, it was an intimate event with close friends, family, and key colleagues from the company. The atmosphere was full of joy and celebration. Emma looked stunning in a classic lace dress with subtle details that highlighted her natural beauty. James, seeing her walk down the aisle, felt breathless. He had never thought he'd find someone who completed him so perfectly after all they'd been through. As Emma walked toward the altar, her eyes met James's. In that moment, all their struggles, challenges, and difficult moments felt worth it. Each step was meaningful, a reminder that their love had been forged through chaos and determination. At the altar, the officiant began the ceremony, but for Emma and James, the world seemed to disappear. All that mattered was what they felt for each other. When exchanging vows, James's words made Emma's eyes shine. "Emma, You're not just the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with. You're the reason I believe love can transform everything. You've taught me that true strength lies in sharing, trusting, and growing together. I promise to stand by your side through every moment, easy or challenging. You're my home, my partner, my love." Emma smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek. When it was her turn, she held James's hands firmly and said, "James, you've shown me that even the most guarded hearts can open. You taught me that strength isn't just about overcoming challenges, but facing them alongside the one you love. I promise to love you every day of our lives, support you in all your choices, and build a story worthy of what we've started together." As they exchanged rings, the guests cheered, but Emma and James were oblivious to it all. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, James leaned in to kiss Emma, sealing the promise of a future filled with love, trust, and partnership. The reception was filled with genuine joy. Friends and family toasted the couple, sharing funny and touching stories about their relationship. James, usually reserved, surprised everyone with a heartfelt speech during the evening. "I want to thank everyone for being here today. But more than that, I want to thank Emma for transforming my life. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I hope everyone here finds something as special as what I've found with you." Emma embraced him, and the two danced under the garden lights as their guests watched with smiles. The couple radiated happiness, and no one doubted they were destined to build a life full of love and accomplishment. That night, as the stars shone brightly and the last guests departed, Emma and James sat alone in the garden under the soft moonlight. They didn't need words. They simply held hands, knowing that together they could face anything. And what do you think? Was Emma right to forgive James? Share your opinion in the comments. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What's your score? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep up with all our stories. And don't forget to check out more touching stories by clicking here on the end screen.